Thanks.
Okay, are we recording? Best you can tell? Okay, hi, and welcome everyone who's just joined us. This webinar is being recorded so that we may share it and later. And so if you want to be visible in the recording, that's great. We love seeing your smiling face, but please know that it is being recorded. Okay, now to begin the presentation. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, you can hear me, great. Okay, well, thank you, Jeff, for covering. This was the front page photo on the Daily Camera, I believe, yesterday. One of the many college students at CU Boulder who was moving out of the dorms after the guidance was given that we needed to go back home, wherever home was. And the campus was no longer a place that wanted to house a small city of students. And so thank you, Jeff, for covering what our response has been. At the end of this presentation, I'm eager to hear about your own personal stories that tie into these themes that we're talking about in this chapter, about our connection to one another. How are you creatively connecting with people who aren't under your roof already? We're talking today about one of the 7 chapters that are in the Trends Report. A little bit of background about Community Foundation and the Trends Report. Your Community Foundation is going on 30 years old. We are created for and by Boulder County, and we are in pursuit of a vision of a more equitable Boulder County. Equity is our vision. Our approach is that we do nothing about us without us. We are about resident-centered leadership. We stand with the people who are experiencing inequity, and we believe that we accomplish more together and more together than alone. We've published Trends now for over 22 years, and we publish this as a community resource that helps guide our strategic work, and we hope that it is helpful to you and to other organizations. It's made possible because in addition to being a grant maker, the Community Foundation is a nonprofit in its own right. And so this is actually unique in the field of community foundations to have a community indicators report housed at a community foundation. For all of our existence, almost all of our existence, for more than 22 years anyway, we have produced this, and it's grown over time from something that was more of an analysis and a narrative about the statistics that are longitudinal trends shaping the demographics and the health and human services and various aspects of our lives, to more of a journalistic endeavor that takes a 3-step approach. We now look at what the longitudinal trend lines are from a statistical perspective. We do analysis. Then we come up with what we think is new and persistent. We consult with local experts, and we don't stop there. We go and we find people who are really in the center of the stories that the trends are pointing to. And then we flip it around and present it to you in a 100-page glossy magazine. If you don't have a copy, be happy to get you one. We now have a website where you can explore all this data and more. There's also a Trends podcast that is hosted by KGNU's Rosanna Longo-Better. She is their equity reporter, who is covering stories from the perspective of people living in the middle of the trends that we see in this magazine. While this webinar is about civic participation and giving, I thought I would start by talking a little bit about our demographics, because in order to understand how we interact in the civic and giving arenas, we have to understand a little bit more about who we are. Now, if you'll forgive me, I am going to just pause briefly so that I can let anyone into the waiting room who may have arrived. I'm just going to check it real quick. I don't see anyone else, so we're good to go there. Thanks for your patience. So getting back to taking a look at just a few things about who we are. One thing that we know about who we are, particularly when we look in the city of Boulder, is that our housing prices are determining more about who lives here really than anything else. When you look at our demographics over the last couple of decades, it really is in the home prices and what's been happening there. It really is a story where even our current demographics don't match current pricing. There is a gentrification that is real, and it's having consequences as far as who is able to afford to live in this county. When you look at who's among us and you think about this question of how connected are we, it's important to recognize how many of us were born elsewhere. It turns out that only a third of our county residents were born in the state of Colorado. That's that second line there that says 32% of our residents were born in Colorado. So 2/3 of our residents were born either in some other state or some other country. Ironically, our Latino population across Colorado, 80% of Latinos who live here were born in Colorado. And so in the last few years, as more and more sort of overt acts of discrimination have been popping up, particularly against our immigrant community, there have been more and more calls by people, who've made comments like, go back where you came from. What I've started to realize is the proper answer to that is, yes, let's all do that. Another thing about us that is actually on track with the rest of the first world is that we're aging. When you look at this chart, it's a little hard to read because it's so tiny, but that yellow band is showing our 65 and older population. It's showing that currently we have about 50,000 residents out of our 320,000 who are in our senior population. By the time I'm in that population, it's going to be double that. And so this has broad reaching questions about how are we going to make sure that we have the infrastructure and services as our baby boomers and others age into this population, but also what are our attitudes and are we welcoming to our elders? And we'll get into some survey information that's a little bit disturbing on how far we have to go answering that question. We know that when you talk about the nuclear family, as far as families with kids underfoot, most families with kids live outside of Boulder. Again, I think this is a direct correlation with the housing prices. But here you're seeing populations, nearing 65, 70% of the population is a family household in the L towns on the eastern part of Boulder County, whereas less than half of the population here in the city of Boulder are families with kids. We know we're becoming more diverse. This is a picture of J.L. Mayers. His family has been in Longmont for 5 generations, and his grandmother tells him stories about how these railroad tracks where he's being photographed here used to be the dividing line about where Anglos and Hispanics lived. She said it was an unspoken rule we understood as Latinos that we could live on the east side but not the west side of the track. That needs to change. It is changing over time, and it needs to change because we have a fact, and that is that the Latinos are our future as far as our population trends. In the Latino population, fully half of our residents are under the age of 25, compared to in the general population, 1/3 are under the age of 25. One of the programs that the Community Foundation has running to address our demographic shift and also our lack of people of color and from minority populations being represented in our elected offices is Leadership Fellows. For more than a decade now, we've had a class of 30 to 40 fellows who have gone through this leadership development program, which is now a partnership with the Boulder Chamber. And by the end of it, we've had a good success rate in what our call to action is, and that is that within a year, they will join either a board or a campaign for an issue or a candidate, or they will run for office themselves. And 80% of our graduates do one of those things in the year after they graduate. I know we've got at least one Leadership Fellow alumni, Deb Simmons, on the call. Okay, so with our demographics as background, I want to jump into our civic participation and giving. But first, we're going to jump back over and just make sure that there's no one being neglected in our waiting room. Okay, which there's not. Wow, I'm getting faster at this already.
Oh, Pam Malsbender was also a Leadership Fellow.
Oh, hey, Pam. Thank you for that reminder. Fantastic. Glad to have our people on the call. Okay, so now we're going to look at some trends with civic participation and giving. Generally speaking, you know, everywhere we look, there's work to do. We have a lot of work to do yet in achieving connected and inclusive communities. We know that our charitable giving rates are well below national averages, and we know that it's driven in part by residents not seeing the needs all around us. And as we listen to the community, we hear a theme emerge more and more, and that is that people feel disconnected. They're yearning for the sorts of relationships with one another that might increase awareness of our community's needs. It's times like this, though, during the coronavirus and what we've seen in prior natural disasters like the fire and the flood, when we see people at their best. And so this is really a moment when we are going to have our social fabric pulled at and tested. And so let's think about that as we dive into some of the things that we see in this chapter. We know that we're not as inclusive as our progressive brand. Here in Boulder County, a lot of people assume, oh, this is a place that's welcoming to all. Actually, our surveys have consistently over more than 10 years shown otherwise. We know that generally speaking, when surveyed, members of our community feel that we are most open to gay and lesbian members of our population, but that we are least welcome to immigrants, racial and ethnic minorities, and senior citizens. And so, you know, this is not just data that we find in our own survey. Recently at a City of Boulder survey, there was someone quoted who said in their response, for people of color or for people who look or act different, going into public places, restaurants, shopping, there is a reality that you might be treated differently. So this comes as a shock to a lot of our majority population. But when you talk with anyone who is a minority trying to get by in a city and a county without as much minorities as the rest of the country, they'll tell you this is a very real experience. This is a picture of our former board chair, Carmen Ramirez, giving a presentation on some work that we spent over a year doing with her. It was about cultural brokers. And there's a story in the Trends chapter about how minority leaders, and particularly cultural brokers, feel like they are constantly riding a roller coaster where the community is variously interested at different times in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let me explain what I mean by cultural brokers. Cultural brokers are people who share a common background with a minority population in our community. And so in Carmen's case, she's a Latina bilingual cultural broker. She is someone who speaks Spanish natively and who is just naturally and commonly and frequently approached by other Latino residents of Boulder County who have known her either through friends of friends or just by reputation, may have a need and approach her and say, Carmen, I have this issue. I'm wondering if you can help. Cultural brokers are constantly looked to not only by the institutions where they may work, but also by the community and tugged and pulled at. And so what we're trying to encourage, along with Boulder County and some other institutions that are leading this work, is that we need to flip our paradigm and start to look not just for diversity's sake, but really start valuing cultural brokers for the unique bridge that they bring between our institutions and the populations that we're trying to reach. This roller coaster Carmen and others are referring to is, there's a lot of focus right now on equity. The Community Foundation is certainly one of the institutions locally that is focusing a lot on that. In fact, it's become our whole vision. You look at Boulder County, you look at Boulder Valley School District, lots of nonprofits are all talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. What we need to make sure as we talk about this is that we're able to also demonstrate current and future plans, but current work and previous work that demonstrates and proves a commitment to this. Otherwise, our minority members of our population, our minority neighbors, are just going to, for very good reasons, say, well, that's a lot of talk again. So here's a stat that we want to improve on. While 25% of us here in Boulder County currently identify as people of color, we only have a little bit less than 9% of our elected officials who identify as people of color. So what we know is that until our decision makers are representative of the background of our population, we're going to keep missing opportunities that are in our blind spots, but that people of color would see immediately to help better serve our community. There's an article in this magazine also with a very, very unique perspective of Paula Stone Williams. She was the CEO of a large religious nonprofit, and then realized that she was a woman. And so now, as someone who lived more than half a life as a white man, she has some incredible insights that she shares on the TED Talk stage, seeing white male privilege through the lens of a transgender woman. I recommend you look at her TED Talk if you have the time. Just plug in her name. And she had some, I think, key advice for white men. And you can see the points she made here. Make sure women are in the meeting. Don't interrupt women. Give women credit for their work. Hire mothers and be aware of your implicit bias against them. And be aware of implicit racial bias. This is a picture of a couple of people who are in Longmont and had just received their citizenship, U.S. citizenship. This was made possible in partnership between El Comité and High Plains Bank. So you've got our former board member, John Creighton, there, who's president of the bank. And then to his left is Marta Moreno, who is the founder of El Comité. Marta and Donna Lovato came to John, who just works up the street, and said, you know, we teach citizenship classes, but the $700 that it costs in order to enroll in the classes is often too much for our participants. And so John and his bank opened up a citizenship loan program at zero interest that you can pay that $700 over the course of 2 years while you're getting your citizenship. And so far it's worked out really nicely. And, you know, John made the point that there are small things from a business perspective that we can do that make a big difference for members of our community. That message is something that resonates right now. It's as we are all sort of moving towards sheltering in place, we are encouraged to think about the small acts of kindness and the things that we can do that reach beyond our walls and might make a big difference for our neighbors. I spoke a little bit about cultural brokers. This is a photo of a partnership that we worked on with KGNU, where we had a listening booth at the Day of the Dead Festival in Longmont at the Longmont Museum. And people could go into this listening booth and they could be interviewed virtually by 5 different leaders of the community and answer questions about how they learn about local news and information, and what their local news and information needs are. All of this is an effort to try to lift up the stories of people that we don't as frequently hear from, because another theme of the whole purpose of Trends is that in order to, become good doers in the community, we need to be good knowers. We have to understand where people are coming from and be in relationship with all our neighbors. Well, the census is here. I hope everyone has received their notice in the mail and gone online to 2020census.gov and spent 10 minutes completing 10 questions that will have an impact on the next 10 years of all of our lives. There is a particular need right now, even before the coronavirus changed all of our behavior. There was already a perfect storm gathering over this particular census. As you all know, every 10 years, it's in the Constitution, we take a census. Many countries do. And one thing that we were able to do with the generous support of many donors was set up a 2020 Census Fund and work with other funding partners to make sure that we had a team of cultural brokers out there that's about 21 people deep across 14 different organizations. These cultural brokers are waking up every day thinking about how they can get out the count, make sure that everyone in our county is counted. And the reason for wanting to do this is because it really comes down to political representation as well as federal dollars. In fact, there's $2,300 federal dollars per year per person that flows through about 55 different federal funding streams and hits our community. Every nose that's not counted is worth $23,000 a year times 10 years. So each person that is counted is another $23,000 over the next decade for our community. Now, of course, this coronavirus has forced our outreach team to tap into their network in novel ways. And I have to say, I'm impressed and I'm inspired, and it is quite an uphill battle not to be able to do the kind of outreach that members of our historically hard to reach population really are most reachable at. It's this one-on-one, it's the human contact. When you can't have human contact, you need to figure out that one-on-one and get the message out in creative ways. And they're definitely working on it. I'm always inspired to hear in what ways they are. But one way that you can help is making sure that you and everyone you know are completing the census, because the more people in our community that fill out the census, that's fewer people that the Census Bureau has to then follow up with, and they can focus on the harder to count populations. One of the things we look at in civic participation is, what does our voting participation look like? Well, in 2016 in Boulder County, our voter participation, as far as our turnout, was lower than it had been in the previous presidential year. So if you look at the chart there on the bottom and you compare 2012 to 2016, you can see that we were down 7 percentile points as far as our turnout for that presidential election. You can see, on the other hand, the upswing in 2018. You need to compare it to an apples to apples year. Presidential turnout is always higher than non-presidential voting years. So when you look at the percent, 82% in 2018 that turned out in Boulder County, that is impressive compared to 2 years before, or 4 years prior to that rather, when there was a 75% turnout, and 4 years before that when it was still in the high 70s, but not nearly as high as it was in 2018. So we shall see if this trend holds. I've got a feeling this is going to be a big year. And then, the other thing we look at in this chapter is our giving. Pause for 1 second while I make sure that we're not neglecting anyone who wants to join us. I will just toggle over real quick. Okay, we're still doing fine. Okay. Everybody still with me? Can you hear me, Brooke?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I get paranoid when I don't hear anyone. I start to think I'm just this guy alone in his attic. Glad to have you all with me. So what we know overall about our giving is that we are not very philanthropic compared to either the state or the nation when we talk about a percentage of our income that we give to charitable causes. What it adds up to is a giving ratio that is 2.56% of our income on average in Boulder County. The national giving ratio is 3.1%. And the difference, if we were to true up to the national average, would mean $68 million more that would come out of Boulder County and into nonprofit charitable causes. So we call that a $68 million giving opportunity. Our current giving rate is a little deceiving because we are a wealth center in our state, and really compared to nationally, the total dollars coming out of Boulder County are actually in the top 5% of the nation. But if you believe that wealthier places ought to give in line and proportionate with their wealth, then we are not keeping up. There's a picture here of Community Food Share, one of the really it's really the tentpole organization for food distribution and tackling food insecurity in our county. And I have an interview with them in this trends report about what would you do, just saying, with an extra $1 million. They had a lot of creative ideas of what they would do with an extra million out of that 68 million if we were all able to ante up to the national average. I will say that consistently our volunteer rates have come in above average. Those who say that they volunteered at least once in the last year in Boulder County are greater than the national average. So our rate of 41% having volunteered is higher than the national average of 30%. As the impacts of coronavirus started to become visible, one of the things that our senior program officer, Lisa Moreno, mentioned was, wow, this really lays bare that our county's volunteer infrastructure is made of seniors. And now seniors are, the most vulnerable population for COVID-19. And with what this is doing is it's taking our volunteer infrastructure really out of the equation. And so what does this mean for volunteering in a time of crisis? We're going to have to get really creative about ways that we can make a difference from our own homes. And we're going to have to figure out how our non-senior population, many of whom have kids underfoot, working remotely, or worse, out of work. Lots of people out of work right now, trying to figure out just how to make their ends meet, suddenly are going from potential volunteer to potentially someone who needs the help of a volunteer and the social safety net. We have in our report just a bit about the nonprofit industry. Here in Colorado, it's a major force. About 5% of our economy is run by the nonprofit sector. And another, I think, helpful statistic is that there are, let me make sure I'm not misquoting as I say this. Well, I'm not going to misquote it. There are statistics in this report on the economic impact of nonprofits that prove that nonprofits really stretch a dollar much farther than the for-profit sector. This is a picture of a couple of our trustees, Cindy Lindsay and Chester Kurtz. We interviewed them for this story because, in addition to serving on our board, they have some thoughts about how they have really what their story has been as philanthropists in their own right. For Cindy, it was doing some volunteer work when she and her husband were in the startup world in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is an interesting place. There is such disparity there between the startup sector on the one hand, and then school districts that may just be on the other side of the street from where you see great wealth. There's so many tiny school districts all over the place, and the difference between one that's well-funded and poorly funded, again, is sometimes just the difference between walking across a highway. And so it was really being in proximity and building relationships with students and families in poverty that opened her eyes to what she and her husband wanted to do with their philanthropy. Similarly with Chester, who's a partner in a local accounting firm, he sees both sides of that equation. He works with some people that have created wealth in their businesses and who are good people, but not thinking about philanthropy when they make it big. And he's informed by his childhood growing up in a coal town whose economy was drying up in Montana, and also being raised by educators where, they lived in a school district that was majority free and reduced lunch, especially as the economy receded. And so how we kind of bring our own experiences into our current life, really, I've found informs whether and to what extent we are working on causes in our community that serve others. So a lot of times people say, well, this is all well and good, but what can I do? And so we're always sure to include some tips in each chapter. And these are the tips that we included in this chapter. Has tips for employers about recruiting, hiring, promoting, and retaining people of color in their businesses, making sure their employees are culturally competent and receive cultural competency training. Easier said than done. It's a process. It's not just something you can check the box on. Elect people of color to represent your government. Do your own personal work, developing your cultural competency and understanding white privilege. And finally, make sure you're giving financially, at least at the national rate. I said it was 3.1, excuse me, it's 3.2% of income. And tell your friends and family what you're doing and why you're doing it. So that concludes what I wanted to present to you about when it came to the Civic Participation and Giving chapter. What it all rolls up to is a call to action to discover, to connect, and to engage. Together we can find our way. That's never been more true than now, as many of us are phoning into this webinar remotely and wanting solutions and also a sense of connection and purpose. And so I'm going to flip back here to see your smiling faces. And I'm wondering if we can start by, let me see if any questions came in. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but if anyone has a burning question on their mind or a comment that they wanted to make, I'd like to open it up for our Q&A section right now. Just be sure if you have something to say that you unmute yourself.
Chris, I just want to say we can still see your screen if you want to stop the
Oh, that's why I couldn't see all of you. Thank you, Brooke.
Uh-huh.
Okay, there we go. Okay, Deb, you've got your hand raised. Go ahead.
One of the things that can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that I'm noticing in working with Pam and others across the nonprofit community, amongst my friends who are all involved, active volunteers, our church, for example, I see people coming together in ways that are just, they're not posted. We all have time to come together now. And the things that we're coming together and the ways in which we're coming together, I think are going to address the issue on the slide about our demographics. Our church is going way far out to teach our whole membership, including older folks, mostly older folks, how to do Zoom meetings. And so we're connecting that way and bringing folks who might not otherwise be able to use Zoom together with the rest of the community. So now we have a new set of skills that we can use to, you know, rally folks. I see that as a good outcome that addresses that concern that you know, legitimately are raising about our growing senior population.
Thank you, Deb. Who else has a thought as you digest what we were just presented? And I would also welcome any particular stories you might share that give you evidence of our connection with one another, even as we physically separate.
This is Dorothy, and I have a question.
Yes.
About the coronavirus. Are the statistics, I think, are for Boulder County? Do you know if there are any cases in Longmont? Because I just got off a Zoom call, and then I spoke to a couple of people, and they said, oh, we're safe in Longmont. There aren't any cases here.
So, Dorothy, are you in Longmont?
No, I live in Boulder, but
yeah.
I belong to a quilt guild, and they're going to be doing some sewing for the Longmont hospital. I called the Boulder hospital, and they said at this point they're not soliciting any handmade masks or anything like that. But, you know, people in Longmont aren't so worried about it, and I just wonder if it's going to backfire on them, because a lot of women are seniors. I mean, a lot of the people that I deal with in various organizations are all seniors, and we're staying put. You know, I haven't decided what's going to happen this next week, but I normally volunteer at the community kitchen, community table, and I have to decide if I should be going there anymore, you know. But some of my other volunteer activities are curtailed because we take seniors to cultural events.
I think that it's safe to say that the 13 or so confirmed cases, I don't know if it's 13 or 16 at this point in Boulder County, are just a sample of what's out there. I mean, once we know that it's here in Boulder County, those are just the confirmed cases. So it's kind of I think that depending on testing data and trying to pinpoint who has been confirmed as a positive coronavirus case is a little bit missing the point at this juncture. I think you just have to assume it's here. Now, there are people who have a mild case, and there are people with acute cases. And unfortunately, because it's so hard to get tested, there are plenty of people presenting with some symptoms who cannot confirm whether they have it or not. And even after they heal from it, they're not going to have the benefit of knowing whether they're now immune, having gone through it, or whether they had the flu or something else. So I'm not trying to scare anyone, but I agree with, I think, what your instincts were, Dorothy, and that is that no one in Longmont should be under an assumption that, you know, the coronavirus is not in Longmont. I also want to say this is an opportunity for us to talk amongst ourselves. Please don't feel like this is just a Q&A between me and you. Let's open this conversation up for everyone. Who else has a thought or a question or a story that they'd like to share? I'm going to call on Pam. Hey, Pam, tell us a story. Is there, do you see any evidence in the path you're walking over the last week or two of a community coming together while we've all been separated?
Well, my work is a lot with Deb and reentry, and also with the schools and youth in high school and college age. And they were all traumatized, and I think still are, that being the high school juniors and seniors in particular, because that is such a stressful time filled with anticipation. Sorry about that. And now it's filled with uncertainty. So we're doing a lot to reach out to the high school juniors and seniors. And I just sent out a meeting doodle to have a Zoom with two of our groups of young women. I have a high school and a college age club, and I have about 20 kids that have signed up to talk virtually next Tuesday and Wednesday nights, which tells me they want to talk. So I just think that my story on that is to keep reaching out, because sometimes it took me 2 or 3 texts to the kids to say, hey, fill out the doodle poll. I need to know when you can meet. But they're filling it out, and they need to connect and know that something is still consistent in their life.
Yeah. People are voting with their doodles.
Exactly.
vote with their feet.
Exactly. And not that we can tell them everything's going to be okay or give them any permanent answers, but I think just to know that there are still people out there who love them, are thinking about them, and are willing to talk with them and hear what they're feeling. And that's not just youth. I mean, I think that's across all age groups right now.
I was just going to say, I'm going to ditto that, because I've been reaching out to some of my friends that are, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and trying to call as many people as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I think other people are doing the same thing. Our synagogue is doing a phone thing. And my quilt group, I got a call this morning from them, do you need anything?
That's great. Dorothy, say more. What's your synagogue doing to organize all of you?
Well, they had a volunteer online. If you were willing to do different things, and I don't want to go to people's homes, etc., but they're doing a phone bank to call everybody to make sure that they're okay. And my quilt guild did this, the board did that, but they're reaching out to volunteers to say, well, I call X number of people and make sure they're okay and see if they have any needs.
That's great.
So, and we're doing the same thing with the seniors at Golden West. I volunteer with Circle of Care, and we're going to do the same thing for them. And I've been calling my relatives and my older friends, and people in the guild that are, because we have a lot of people that are 70s and 80s. And then I belong to a group at the church that quilts, and I've been calling some of them as well. So I think everybody in the community is reaching out.
Dorothy, when you reach out, tell us an example of a response that you received. I assume these are welcome calls that you're making.
Everybody has really appreciated the call. And one lady hasn't come for a long time, and she lives over in Flatirons Terrace. And she said, thank you for calling, because people appreciate somebody reaching out.
It's about the connection as much as the need, isn't it?
Yes. Of just knowing somebody cares.
The temptation is to ask, well, what are you hearing? What are the needs? Let's mobilize. And yes, that's important, but we need to not lose track of the essence of what you're saying. And that is just knowing that someone cares. Pick up the phone. That's great. Hey, Martha Olson, I was wondering, you're so involved in various education initiatives, and all of that takes organizing. The one that's shaping up for the November ballot, I noticed, was just trying to ramp up, even as we all started running for shelter with coronavirus. What are you hearing in the education community about how they're rethinking the whole campaign?
Good question. And I'm just trying to catch up because I was out of the country for about a month and was happy to get back early when I did. They're trying to figure out what they can do online. I mean, they're over the next few weeks going to be holding a lot of online webinars and that kind of thing. I think we had a pretty strong network built from Amendment 73 that, again, there's going to be a lot of phone call, technology reach out for that group. And then they're also trying to talk to legislators individually, and especially members of the Joint Budget Committee, to have them think that, okay, when the budget crisis hits, given Colorado's restrictions under Tabor, they have to think more creatively than just cutting, because that's going to decimate everything, especially the schools and the healthcare system. So they're looking at, perhaps we could get long shot, have a referred out measure for Amendment 271 instead of having to go the ballot way. They're also looking at some provisions of Tabor that apply for emergencies. And I can't tell you more than that because I have just started getting back into it. So, yeah. But people are working hard to try to figure out a way around this, and also to be proactive so that, come the budget forecasts, everything's not just cut.
Right. Yes, Deb.
But I would say if anyone's curious about anything or wants to learn more, they should go to the Great Education Colorado website, greateducation.org. And also Vision 2020 had a very good website about the proposals that the one that they've settled on to try to put on the ballot. I think that might have morphed into a different name, but I'm not quite sure yet. So sorry, I'm not more up to date.
So, you've raised 2 points that are important just to note here. One is, what do you do when your effort that you're up to in the civic realm depends so much on talking with people?
Yeah.
And holding events and connecting and building enthusiasm and momentum? That's one thing. The other thing is, oh boy, here we go. We had an all-time historic booming economy a minute ago. And we can expect that come election season, that picture is going to be far less rosy. We're not even sure where the bottom is. And we don't even, many of us have a full appreciation for how many people are out of work, are hungry, are dealing with basic human needs, who used to be just fine.
Yeah.
Prior to this.
Yeah. No,
Deborah, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Martha a question. I think a lot of us must be finding that we need for our staffs to learn how to create online trainings.
Yes.
And so we have, the webinars are coming at me rapid fire from different vendors, and they're free, but how to do online webinars, how to do online training, and so on. Is that what you're talking about, that that educators in the schools are doing right now?
I can't talk to what the educators in the schools are doing, but I would assume they're trying to do a lot of that very quickly without a lot of resources. What I was talking about was really more the organizers behind the effort to get more funding into the schools generally. Gotcha. And what they're doing are a lot of online trainings around, what the proposal is, how to carry petitions once we can do that, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So sorry, I can't speak to what's going on hands-on with educators in the schools.
Yeah, Pam and I are working on something right now to help our staff.
Yeah.
Taking from here and there stuff we've got.
I think it's, you know, and I think there's huge differences between school districts, again, you know, and districts that have been well resourced and districts that haven't been. Mm-hmm. You know, districts that are worried that, you know, 70% of their kids are, you know, need their free breakfast and lunch. So what's going to, you know, so they're worried about those things. Whereas I think the Boulder Valley School District is in a little of a different place. And I know Impact on Education has already been very active there too, here in Boulder, mm-hmm. at least from what I've read over the last couple of days.
What's Impact on Education?
That's the nonprofit that supports the Boulder Valley School District.
Okay.
You know, they like, one thing they do is give out backpacks every year to kids from families with low income, you know, full of school supplies. So they're taking that into a different level at this point.
Their executive director was sharing with us that they have a warehouse full of these backpacks. It's the off season right now, but they've opened that warehouse and they're just handing those out right now. They're also working on trying to make sure that the digital divide is closed as quickly as possible, particularly in BVSD with K-5. Those elementary school level kids don't, you know, there's not a one-to-one program for that level like there is in St. Vrain. And so as we shift to online learning for the first time, starting on a week from Monday, that's going to be a big deal, both connectivity and hardware equipment.
That's something I'm really worried about with my kids, because a number of them do not have computers at home. They rely on the MacBooks that they get in the classroom to do their schoolwork. They stay after school to complete it. And then when they go home, there's either no internet, no computer, or even a shared telephone. So it's very hard to be able to consistently reach some students in that more high-risk group.
Yeah. It raises a question for me, and I'm wondering, we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. We're all on this call because we care about Boulder County as well as the world, but we care about Boulder County. This is where we live. What help could the Community Foundation provide as far as helping you feel more connected and more informed? You know, I read the paper, I listen to the radio. I've got, just because I'm in this business, I've got my inbox full of messages from helping organizations. Some of you to various degrees have that too, but we are particularly interested in the community, helping the community meet its need in the midst of this, not just for financial transactions, but also for this question of how we pull a community together when we're physically separated. What types of stories, information, news might the Community Foundation provide to you and to others? What is the hunger out there? What's the appetite?
I'm thinking it's a little early to answer that, because what is something on our minds right now in 2 to 3 weeks might be totally different as we see the realities starting to really set in. Because I'm just starting to reach out and get people to reach back in.
How do you mean reach back in?
Well, like I was saying, you know, scheduling communication times when everybody can assemble the way we are right now.
Oh, right. Like you're reaching out and you're now,
right.
Now they're starting to pour in with their
They're
interest.
starting to come in, and I've got to send 3 texts to individuals saying, hey, you haven't filled this out yet. You know, oh, okay, I'll do it now. So next week will be very interesting when I meet with all these young women via phone and just hear. The grapevine is telling me many of them are working because they're young and they, you know, oh, okay, I'm safe. And they're out there working in family businesses or cleaning houses or doing whatever their families are doing, which scares me a little bit too. But I don't know. I'm curious to hear what they're up to. and how they're doing things like completing their college scholarship applications, or continuing to study for SATs, which were canceled in April. And now how do you motivate a kid to keep studying for something they don't know when they're going to take it? So those are the kinds of frightening things that change their lives, could have a lifelong implication.
I think that's just it. We want to hear stories about the beauty and the terror.
Right.
We want a balance of it, and we want to know one another more. And Pam, you've got a unique window as far as, who this population of students that you're reaching out to who are starting to reach back in. Let me just make a broad solicitation, Pam and others on this call. As you run across stories that you think would be worthwhile for the whole community to understand. And by stories, I mean people and what they're experiencing here in Boulder County. Drop me a line and tell me about them. Okay. Certainly get their permission, but we will do what we can to help the community know itself better in this time.
Okay, we'll do.
Great. I want to welcome Lisa Moreno, our Senior Programs Officer, who joined the call. Hi, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi, Chris.
You've been busy lately.
Less so today.
Congratulations on getting the first round of those grants out the door.
Thank you.
Jeff gave everyone an update at the beginning of this call, and I know the update is now in their inbox as well, about the COVID-19 Response Fund Boulder County. Lisa has been the one who has been the lead on that, and it's involved a whole lot of phone calls and emails and meetings. But we are delivering on our value, which is to make sure this money gets out the door as quickly as possible. All right. Well, what else are people thinking about with regard? Yes, Deb.
Sorry. You asked the question, what can we do to help our community be more connected? What part of the community? Are you talking about just us here, or how help me frame that?
I go back to the central thesis of our trends report, and that is that the strength of a community turns on residents' relationships with one another. And so when I say you on this call, I mean you. More broadly, what I'm talking about is how are you connected beyond your family and your friends to this community? And in what ways could we facilitate either a stronger connection or help you leverage the connections you do have as you find yourself in physical isolation?
Yeah, we have a challenge in that we're working with people on parole who coming out, I mean, they don't have phones.
Mm-hmm.
We're right at the very entry point with them and the parole office here in Longmont. And so honestly, we have yet to see if the stream of folks coming to us dries up, or if we can somehow make phones available to them or make sure they know how to reach us by phone. We're doing everything we can, working with our partners to figure this out.
You've got a very real example, Deb, in your work of how vital it is to have that social capital. You're dealing with people who have been physically separated from their community for many years. And you, perhaps more than many others, are able to translate the power of that need to the need that more and more of us are stumbling into right now.
Thanks. The other population that we're trying to reach is our women inside we've been working with women inside for the last 6 months. We have a class of 12, and we've been seeing them 2 nights a week plus individual counseling sessions. That's totally dried up.
Mm-hmm.
No one's going in those prisons now. And case managers are leaving prisons. It's not a safe place from the standpoint of disease prevention either.
Yeah.
Chris, one thing I would love an update on, although I've been talking to Julie Frieder and try to keep in the loop on it, but you mentioned earlier the census, and the timing of this couldn't be worse. So as you come up with tactics, besides my very limited effort of like sending out Facebook messages and sending out emails to everybody I know and saying, please send this message on, and trying to develop chains of people, can you keep everyone in the loop on what tactically nonprofits and individuals can do to get people out there to fill it out? Because all the tactics we had planned, we can't really do. You know, I mean, nobody's going to go door to door in the community now. So, and as you hear things, that would be something I would appreciate, just keeping everybody in the loop about.
Thanks. I can say a couple of things about what's going on right now, and then I hear you, Pam. We will make an effort to continue externally communicating about what the effort is looking like. I learned yesterday from someone who happened to be living in Ecuador 10 years ago during their census. It turns out many countries do a census on the decennial year. And in Ecuador, as is true in many Latin American countries, the nation goes on lockdown for a day. Everyone must shelter in place, and only the census workers are allowed to roam about the country, and they're knocking on every door and they're taking your information down. And so by that manner of thinking, we're right where we want to be.
Exactly. If we only know how to embrace that tactic.
Right. If only we all weren't so fearful of a knock at the door right now. Which is not, the part that's not going to happen. Just today, the Census Bureau did announce that they are going to delay by 2 weeks the start of their door knocking, and they are also going to extend by 2 weeks the deadline for them to stop their effort. Most people don't know this, but the effort of knocking on doors and having census workers out there in the community, getting the response from those who have not just responded on their own, lasts typically until the end of July. It's now been extended to August 14th. And we know about these deadlines and the rolling nature of things as we almost by the hour get new updates on how long this whole thing's going to last. So that's my hopeful thing. My other hopeful thing I'm going to say about the census is never underestimate the power of people to do a job who are doing a job like it's their job. And that's what we have with this field team of 21 cultural brokers. We actually are needing to, and we have sent them messages of reassurance that they still have a job. I mean, we've funded, help fund, there's now 14 organizations with census outreach partners, these cultural brokers. Their concern is not, am I going to be able to do anything? It's that, well, now that I have to think differently about this, are you still going to pay me to do this work? And so similarly, as volunteers, you rattled off a lot of things, Pam, that you're doing just as an aside, and you're doing more of that and less of the in-person stuff, but you're still doing this like a super volunteer. And so if everyone who's doing this like it's their job could continue to do it like it's their job, the tactics almost don't matter. And look at Latin America. We're actually doing this like they've done it because they've just decided on different tactics all these years. So I've got journalism in my background, so I don't want to say that I'm guilty of being an optimist, but there is an optimistic nature in me that wants to believe that we're actually going to get through this. What we can't do is what we're not doing. We're not yet just giving up and sheltering in place and trying not to connect. If we can all wake up every day worrying about such things as the census, just like we were before, or maybe even a little bit more, then I think the outcome is going to be okay. Now, all bets are off if this, deadline continues and continues and continues to extend this time horizon. And we just have to deal with the state of play as we learn about it, But it looks so far like the census is still on. They're spending more money on advertising than they were already, which was $500 million nationally. And so they're really, they're acting like this thing is really going to happen.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah. Yes, Deb.
You made a statement.
Were you just saying peace?
That too.
Okay.
You said something that I think could be a slogan for right now. Volunteer now like it's your job. I like that. I think that could be a really strong message coming out of the Community Foundation.
Okay. Well, thank you. Last call for sharing of stories, of thoughts, of reflections on civic participation and giving in this context that we're living in. Yes.
I just have one thought, and this goes back to the census, and maybe it's because I really have been out of it for a month, but it seems that it would be very useful. I mean, I have gotten nothing in a fairly extensive email feed from lots of places about the census, that if the Community Foundation put together a really concise, urgent email that all of us could send out to all of our people and ask them to send it on forward, that would be very helpful. I mean, I'm thinking after this call, I should go on to the census website and that kind of thing, but I think that that would be something that would be very useful to have, a tool.
Thank you. That's great.
You maybe already have one and I've just missed it, but if there's something like that out there and we could all share it with everybody we're connected with, I think it would be a good thing.
Thank you, Martha. We are, I'm sure you're on our mailing list. We are sending about weekly to every other week updates, stories from the field as far as what the work is looking like on census outreach. We have a writer doing that. This call to action that you mentioned is something that we could certainly include. I think one of the most effective things that you can do as you're reaching out electronically right now is to take a 30-second video of yourself, whether it's holding up the census that the form you've just filled out, or if you've already done that. Well, excuse me, you're not doing it. You're most likely doing it online right now. But I mean, just a 30-second video saying, hey, it's Martha. I just completed the census. I can't tell you how easy it was. This is a time when we're all at home anyway. It's never, it's never been more easy to fill out online or to call in and fill it out and mail it. We can certainly push out that kind of talking point, that set of talking points. But if you make that live with a 30-second video and, just share it through your list, however you share things, that's something someone will open and they'll go like, oh, look, Martha's back. She's back in town. Okay, right. The census. Yeah, that too.
I can't remember if I filled it out. I know I got it and I don't remember where it is.
Okay. Well, Deb, your instructions are to go fill it out.
So I can, if I've already filled it out, it probably won't let me send it again.
They will dedupe it on the back end. Go ahead and submit it again if you worry that you didn't fill it out.
Are you referring to me as a dupe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Well, I guess it's better than dope.
Yeah, they'll de-dope you on the back end.
Okay.
Sorry, that sounded bad.
What do you know about security?
What do I know about security with the census?
Yes, I'm a little concerned getting my information on the web.
Right. I can tell you, I play a lot with data from the census. 2/3 of the information in our trends report is directly sourced from the census and the American Community Survey. They have that data on lockdown for exactly 76 years. If you've ever played around with Ancestry.com, the reason why you're able to trace your family's roots back so far is because of census data that's been released only after 76 years. That used to be the span of a life on average. I guess they may update that eventually to 96 years. But all of this is to say, they are incredibly secure down to the person level as far as not sharing that personal data. They have some of the finest minds at work actually putting statistical interference into the data so that someone who might have bad intentions that got themselves a big chunk of that data really couldn't parse it down to the individual level. So I know I sound like an ad for the Census Bureau, but I really, having talked to people with the Census Bureau who are some of the brightest, most civically engaged people you'll ever meet. Imagine taking a government job with the census and being excited about that. That's that kind of person. So Dorothy, I know this is a time when we have every reason to be paranoid, and appropriately so, about going online and divulging personal information. But if you are on the website 2020census.gov, you need not be worried that your personal information that you share will be misused.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's lots of, it's in the U.S. code. I mean, there's everyone who works for the census is sworn under penalty of prison and poverty-inducing fines, to treat this information confidentially.
At the risk of being silly, I just shared with everybody 2 videos in case you don't want to make your own video. Some of our girls at Boulder High School made an English and a Spanish version of a 60-second PSA to encourage the community to fill out the census. So spread it wherever you want to send it.
And it's really great. Thank you, Pam, for sharing that. I encourage everybody to take 60 seconds and take a look. This was the Zonta Z Club, mostly Latina girls, right? These students?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from Boulder High, doing a PSA about the census. It was great.
When do
Okay.
you have time to do all this, Pam Malsbender?
That's why I'm bored out of my mind right now. That's why I'm talking to you for 3 hours this morning.
Yeah, I got something for you to do.
We need to work.
Danica Powell, I see that you joined us. I want to welcome you to the conversation and thank you for all of the ways that you have been so civically engaged. If you're able to unmute your mic, would love to hear from you, whether you had any particular questions or thoughts relative to the theme of civic engagement at a time when we are being called to physically isolate from one another.
Okay, can you hear me?
Hi, Danica.
Okay, hi. Well, first of all, I want to thank Kristen Solomon, who just texted me and said, get on this phone call. So I don't know how I didn't know about it. So I just joined. I'm the co-chair of the I Have a Dream Foundation. So we're working on a lot of just response for organization, but I also really interested and to share a little bit about the regional housing work that we're doing around affordable housing. Chris knows about the Home Wanted campaign, and we've really had to pivot a lot of really deep outreach that we were going to do across the county in person through some really great outreach with youth. And we actually were creating a Latinx Leadership Summit in April, which we'll probably just postpone at this point, and working with all the youth councils across 5 jurisdictions. starting to engage with seniors. We were going to be really engaged with the artist community at Boulder Arts Week, and lots of engagement that was all scheduled in person to talk about the need for regional affordable housing initiatives and just really do a lot of storytelling around the community. So we are pivoting and doing some, we're going to be actually rolling out a really cool Home Together campaign next week to just continue the dialogue around housing in our community and create opportunities for people to engage, and with the hopes of, you know, generating and continuing to tell people stories, talk about the need for housing, allow people different ways to participate during this kind of uncertain time where we can't do it in person. And so I'd love, Chris, of course, I'll share that with you once we get going, but it's, you know, we really want to be able to continue the civic engagement piece and reflect and respect that people are at home, but still have stories to share, and that the dialogue needs to continue, especially in the face of this adversity. So that partnership is the Boulder County Regional Housing Partnership, of which Boulder County is very much involved. City of Boulder, Longmont, Louisville, Lafayette, all the communities, and homewanted.org is our website. So I guess that's a little plug and also an explanation of how we're moving our work pretty quickly, but in a hopefully great way. So love your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for your work on that, Danica. That's something that we're also partnering with the Home Wanted effort at the Community Foundation. And we've been in conversations just this week about that very pivot that you talked about. It's a similar one to the census question. You know, there's a whole advocacy getting ramped up now in a time when the whole context that we're working in is changing, both with regard to physical isolation and with regard to the economy. And what does that mean for a potential ballot measure? All of this is kind of TBD. And at the same time, there are some opportunities when a lot of people are spending more time at home with their family. The value and the meaning of home is certainly front of mind when you're sitting there in your home getting these messages and participating in a campaign like that. Danica, earlier.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think we're all experiencing it in different ways. So we're working with the library and the Arts Commission. So I think there are a lot of folks who are really busy right now, and there's a lot of folks who are not as busy. So please reach out to me if you're one of those not so busy folks. I know the library has a lot of folks at home that are storytellers and community builders, and, you know, aren't able to go to their work right now. So I think we're also going to look to help, you know, people feel like they have something to do, I think, which is really important. I know I'm personally feeling that, wanting to have a purpose right now.
Yeah, you're just now wanting to have a purpose, right, Danica? I mean, all of us are fortunate to be in roles where we find ourselves really able to engage on a civic level every day. Thank you, everyone, for joining this call. If there aren't any other things that we'd like to discuss, I think I'll just wrap up by saying the new hashtag is volunteer like it's your job. Jeff, did you want to say anything in closing?
No, just thank you, everyone, for what you're doing. It's been inspiring just to hear what folks are doing on their own, and I think this is all part of standing together as community in challenging times. Really inspired by each of you.
Does this mean volunteering from your home versus going someplace?
Say your question one more time, Dorothy.
Volunteering to make calls or do something like that rather than go someplace. I know they had the
Right.
Help Colorado, and I started to fill it out, and I said, you know, I'm in my 70s and I don't think I want to be, you know, going and picking up groceries for people and doing things like that, you know. I mean, I feel that by making phone calls that, you know, I'm doing my small part.
Yeah, I was inspired by your stories about how you're making phone calls to your peers and to others on the list that your congregation is that your synagogue is sending out. That's an inspiring story, Dorothy. And I would just say, keep it up, and let's hope that others learn about this way that they can also volunteer.
Thank you. And thank you for hosting this.
Well, thank you all for joining us. I think that wraps up this edition of Trends, the focus on civic giving, civic participation in giving. And we so appreciate your participation and the ways that you work every day to build up our community. So take care out there, and please be in touch with the Community Foundation as you stay in touch with the needs of our community.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
All right.
you. Thanks a lot.
So long.
Thanks. Bye.